The scent of wood smoke and horse manure filled the air as Marcus Brennan rode into Jordan Valley, Oregon, his stomach growling louder than the wind whipping through the high desert valley. And he knew if he did not find work soon, he would be joining the rattlesnakes in searching for scraps behind the saloon. It was the summer of 1882, and the small settlement tucked between the Owyhee Mountains had seen better days. The silver boom that had once promised prosperity had fizzled out faster than a candle in a dust storm, leaving behind sun-bleached buildings and hollow-eyed prospectors who could not quite admit defeat. Marcus had been riding for 3 days straight from a ranch job that had ended when the owner sold his herd and moved back east. His pockets held exactly $4.23. His canteen was down to the dregs, and his horse, a sturdy roan named Copper, needed grain more than Marcus needed his next meal. He tied Copper to the hitching post outside the general store, giving the animal a reassuring pat on the neck. "I will find us something, boy, I promise." The heat shimmered off the packed dirt street as Marcus scanned the town. A few buildings lined the main thoroughfare: the general store, a saloon with faded lettering that read, "Lucky Strike," a church that looked like it might blow over in a strong wind, and what appeared to be a boarding house with peeling white paint. A group of men sat outside the saloon, their conversation low and punctuated by occasional bursts of laughter that held no real joy. Marcus was about to head into the general store to ask about work when he caught sight of movement in the narrow alley between two buildings across the street. His hand instinctively moved toward his hip, though he wore no gun there, having sold his Colt 2 months back when funds got tight. But what he saw made him freeze for an entirely different reason. A young woman sat crouched in the shade of the alley, her simple cotton dress covered in dust and patches, her dark blonde hair falling loose from what had once been a neat braid. She could not have been more than 22 or 23 years old, with a face that would have been pretty if not for the hollows beneath her cheekbones and the way her dress hung loose on her frame. But what caught Marcus's attention was not her appearance. It was what she was doing. In her lap sat a chunk of bread, maybe the size of a good potato, brown and hard-looking, like it had seen better days. Around her feet, 3 mangy dogs circled, their ribs showing through matted fur, tails tucked low in a mixture of hope and fear. A 4th animal, a cat so scrawny it looked more like a skeleton with fur, watched from atop a nearby crate. Marcus watched as the woman tore off a piece of the bread and held it out to the nearest dog, a spotted mutt missing part of one ear. The dog crept forward, snatched the bread from her fingers with surprising gentleness, and retreated to gulp it down. She tore off another piece, offering it to the next dog, a black and tan creature that might have had some shepherd in it once upon a time. "Come on, sweet girl," the woman murmured, her voice barely carrying across the street, but somehow cutting through the other sounds of the town. "I know you are scared, but you need to eat." The dog hesitated, then came forward to take the bread. The woman smiled, and Marcus felt something shift in his chest. It was not a smile of someone performing charity or seeking recognition. It was the smile of someone who genuinely cared about these forgotten creatures, who saw their suffering and could not look away. She continued dividing the bread, giving portions to each animal with careful deliberation, making sure everyone got their share. When the bread was nearly gone, she looked at the final piece in her hand, probably no more than 2 bites worth. Marcus saw her throat work as she swallowed, saw the way her hand trembled slightly. She was hungry. Anyone with eyes could see that. But instead of eating that last piece herself, she broke it in 2 and gave half to the spotted dog and half to the cat, who had finally ventured down from its perch. Marcus felt his feet moving before his brain caught up. He crossed the street, his boots crunching in the dirt, and the woman looked up sharply at his approach. Her eyes were green, he noticed, the color of sage in the spring, and they held a wariness that spoke of hard lessons learned. "Madam," he said, removing his hat and holding it against his chest, "I do not mean to intrude, but I could not help but notice you just gave away what looked like your last meal." Her chin lifted slightly, defiance mixing with embarrassment in her expression. "They were hungry. So are you, from the looks of it." She stood up, brushing dust from her dress, and he realized she was taller than he had expected, maybe 5.5 feet, with a straight-backed posture that suggested pride despite her circumstances. "That is none of your concern, mister." "Marcus," he said, "Marcus Brennan. And you are right, it is not my concern. But I am about to go into that general store and buy myself some supplies, and I would consider it a kindness if you would let me buy you a proper meal at the boarding house. Nothing improper, just one hungry person helping another." She studied him for a long moment, those green eyes taking in his worn but clean clothes, his weathered face. The honest exhaustion that he knew showed in every line of his body. He was 26 years old, but felt twice that age some days. Life as a ranch hand had a way of wearing a man down. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You do not know me." "No, I do not," Marcus admitted. "But I just watched you give your last food to animals that most people would kick aside without a second thought. That tells me something about who you are. And in a world that seems to have run short on kindness, I figure the least I can do is offer a meal." She hesitated, and he could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Pride versus hunger. Independence versus need. Finally, she gave a short nod. "My name is Clara Thornton," she said, "and I will accept your offer, Mr. Brennan, but only if you let me work it off somehow. I will not take charity." "It is not charity if it is offered between equals," Marcus said, but seeing the set of her jaw, he added, "But if it makes you feel better, maybe you can tell me about this town while we eat. I am new here and looking for work. Information is valuable." That seemed to satisfy her. They walked together down the street, drawing a few glances from the men outside the saloon. Marcus kept a respectful distance, aware of how gossip could spread in small towns, and not wanting to damage her reputation any further than it might already be damaged. The boarding house was run by a stout woman named Mrs. Henley, who looked at Clara with a mixture of pity and disapproval when they walked in. "Table for two," Marcus said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Mrs. Henley showed them to a small table near the window. The dining room was nearly empty at this hour, just a traveling salesman in one corner, picking at his teeth with a toothpick. The menu was simple: beef stew, biscuits, and coffee. Marcus ordered 2 bowls with extra biscuits. While they waited for the food, Clara sat with her hands folded in her lap, her back not quite touching the chair. Now that they were in better light, Marcus could see the evidence of her struggles more clearly. Her dress had been mended multiple times, the fabric faded from what had probably once been a cheerful yellow to a washed-out cream. Her hands bore small scars and calluses, the hands of someone who had worked hard. But there was something refined in the way she held herself, in the curve of her neck and the way she spoke, that suggested she had not always lived this way. "You are not from Jordan Valley originally," he said. It was not a question. "No," Clara said. "I came here 2 years ago with my father. He had heard there was opportunity in the mining camps. He was a geologist, studied rocks and minerals back in Pennsylvania. He thought he could make his fortune advising the prospectors, helping them find the best sites to dig. What happened?" Her fingers tightened in her lap. "He died. Fever took him last winter. By the time I sold everything we had to pay for his doctor bills and burial, I had nothing left. I have been trying to find work ever since, but there are not many opportunities for a woman alone in a town like this." Marcus understood what she was not saying. A woman alone was viewed with suspicion in frontier towns. Without a husband or father to vouch for her respectability, she would be assumed to be either a potential burden or, worse, of questionable morals. "Have you thought about leaving, going to a bigger city where there might be more opportunities?" "With what money?" Clara asked, and there was no bitterness in her voice, just simple fact. "The stagecoach fare to Boise is more than I have made in the past 3 months combined. I have been taking in mending when I can find it, cleaning houses for anyone who will hire me. Mrs. Patterson down at the far end of town lets me sleep in her shed in exchange for helping with her laundry. It is not much, but it is something." The food arrived, and Marcus watched Clara's eyes widen slightly at the sight of the steaming stew. To her credit, she did not fall on it like a starving animal, though he suspected she wanted to. Instead, she picked up her spoon with deliberate care and took small, measured bites, chewing thoroughly. It was the behavior of someone who had learned that eating too fast after going hungry could make you sick. Marcus ate his own meal, giving her the space to eat without scrutiny. When she had finished about half her bowl, she looked up at him. "You said you were looking for work. What kind of work do you do?" "Ranch hand, mostly," Marcus said. "I can handle cattle, break horses, mend fences, pretty much anything that needs doing on a spread. I am good with animals. I spent the last 3 years working at the Double R Ranch up in Idaho, but the owner sold out. I heard there might be work down this way, but I am starting to think my information was out of date." Most of the big ranches are further west, Clara said, closer to the Snake River where there is better grazing. Around here, it is mostly small operations, families trying to scratch out a living with a few head of cattle or sheep. The biggest spread within 20 miles is the Elkhorn Ranch, owned by Samuel Masters. He is always looking for hands, but... She hesitated. But what? He is not a kind man, Clara said carefully. He works his men hard and pays them little. I have heard stories of men getting injured and being turned out without a penny. He has a son too, Thomas. He is worse than his father in some ways. Marcus filed that information away. Anyone else hiring? There is the widow Cassidy. She has about 200 head of cattle and a good piece of land north of town. Her husband died in a riding accident last year, and she has been trying to keep the place running herself with just one hired man. I heard her foreman quit last month, said the work was too much for one person. She might be willing to take on someone new. That sounds promising, Marcus said. How would I find her place? Clara gave him directions, and they continued talking as they finished their meal. She told him about the town, about which merchants were honest and which would try to cheat newcomers, about where the best water could be found, about the Paiute families who sometimes came through to trade. Marcus found himself enjoying her company more than he had enjoyed anyone's in a long time. She was intelligent and observant, with a dry sense of humor that showed itself in unexpected moments. When they finished eating, Marcus paid Mrs. Henley, ignoring the woman's pursed lips and knowing looks. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. "Thank you for the meal, Mr. Brennan," Clara said, "and for treating me like a person instead of a problem." "Marcus," he corrected, "and you have nothing to thank me for. But I have a proposition for you, if you will hear me out." She tilted her head, waiting. "I am going to ride out to the Cassidy Ranch first thing tomorrow morning. If the widow hires me, I will have a steady job and wages. Once I get my first pay, I want to hire you to do my mending, washing, and maybe cook a few meals when I have time to eat them. It would not be charity, just business. Every working man needs those things done, and I would rather pay someone I know than a stranger." Clara's eyes narrowed slightly. "You do not even know if you will get the job." "Then I will find another one," Marcus said with a confidence he only half felt. "I am a good worker, and I am willing to work hard. Someone around here will need a hand." She studied him for a long moment, and he wondered what she saw. He was not much to look at, tall and lean, with brown hair that never quite stayed in place, and a face that was more weathered than handsome. His clothes were clean but patched, his boots worn down at the heels. He had no money to speak of, no prospects beyond the hope of finding work, but he met her gaze steadily, letting her see that he meant what he said. "All right," Clara said finally. "If you find work, I will accept your business, but I work for my pay, Mr. Brennan. I will not do half a job." "I would not expect anything less," Marcus said. "And it is Marcus." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Marcus." They parted ways then, Clara heading back toward wherever she was staying, Marcus returning to where he had left Copper, tied outside the general store. He bought a small bag of grain for the horse and a few basic supplies for himself, some jerky, hardtack, coffee, and tobacco. It left him with less than $2 in his pocket, but Copper needed to eat. That night, Marcus bedded down in the livery stable, paying the hostler 50 cents for the privilege of sleeping in the hayloft. It was clean enough and out of the wind, which was more than he had had some nights. As he lay looking up at the rough-hewn beams, he found his thoughts returning to Clara Thornton. He had known plenty of women in his life. His mother, who had died when he was 12, the ranchers' wives who sometimes hired him for odd jobs, saloon girls who offered company for a price. But he could not remember the last time a woman had affected him the way Clara had. There was something in her dignity, in the way she had cared for those starving animals, despite her own hunger, that had reached past all his carefully constructed defenses and touched something he had thought long dead. Marcus had learned early not to form attachments. His father had been a drifter who had disappeared when Marcus was 8, leaving his mother to raise 3 children alone. When she died, the children had been split up among relatives who saw them as burdens rather than blessings. Marcus had left at 14, lying about his age to get work as a stable boy, and he had been on his own ever since. He had learned that caring about people only led to pain, that it was better to keep moving, to never put down roots, to never let anyone matter too much. But watching Clara share her last bread with those strays had cracked something open inside him. She had nothing, but she gave what she had. She was alone and struggling, but she had not let the world make her cruel. There was strength in that, a kind of courage that Marcus recognized and respected. He fell asleep thinking about green eyes and a gentle smile, about a woman who fed strays when she herself was starving, and about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, he had found something in Jordan Valley worth staying for. The next morning dawned clear and cool, the kind of high desert morning that made a man grateful to be alive. Marcus groomed Copper until the horse's coat shone, checked his tack twice, and set out toward the Cassidy Ranch following Clara's directions. The land here was harsh but beautiful in its own way. Rolling hills covered in sagebrush and scrub, rocky outcroppings that jutted toward the sky, mountains rising in the distance like ancient sentinels. The air smelled of dust and wild herbs, and a red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals in lazy spirals. The Cassidy Ranch sat in a valley where a creek ran year-round, providing water for cattle and crops alike. Marcus could see cattle grazing in the distance, their red and white bodies dotting the landscape. The main house was a solid structure of logs and stone, built to withstand the brutal winters that could sweep down from the mountains. A barn, corrals, and several outbuildings completed the compound. As Marcus rode up, a woman emerged from the house. She was in her mid-30s, he guessed, with auburn hair streaked with gray and pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a divided riding skirt and a man's shirt, and she carried a rifle with the ease of someone who knew how to use it. "Can I help you?" she called out, her voice neither friendly nor hostile. Marcus dismounted, keeping his hands visible. "Mrs. Cassidy, my name is Marcus Brennan. I heard in town that you might be looking for a hired hand. I have experience with cattle and horses, and I am willing to work hard." She looked him over with the shrewd eye of someone who had seen plenty of men come and go. "Where did you work last?" "The Double R Ranch up in Idaho, 3 years under Foreman Jack Crawford. Before that, the Broken Arrow spread in Montana, and before that, various jobs going back to when I was 14. "Why did you leave the Double R?" "Owner sold the ranch and the herd, moved back east. Crawford can vouch for me if you need a reference." "Mrs.?" Cassidy lowered the rifle slightly. "I do need help. My foreman quit 3 weeks ago, and I have been trying to manage with just one other hand, but it is too much. The problem is, I cannot pay much. $25 a month plus room and board. You would sleep in the bunkhouse and eat with me and my daughter. The work is hard, and the hours are long." $25 was less than Marcus had made at his last job, but it was steady work, and it would be enough. "That sounds fair, madam. I need someone who will stay," she continued, "not some drifter who will work a month and then move on when something better comes along. I need someone reliable." Marcus met her eyes. "I am not a drifter by choice, madam. I am a drifter by circumstance. Every job I have left was because the job ended, not because I quit. If you hire me, I will work hard. I will treat your animals well, and I will stay as long as you need me." She studied him for another long moment, then nodded. "All right, Mr. Brennan, you can start today. Let me show you the bunkhouse and introduce you to Pete, my other hand. Then I will explain what needs doing." The bunkhouse was basic but clean, 4 narrow beds, a small stove for heat, a table with 2 chairs. The other hired hand, Pete, was a grizzled man in his 50s with a limp from an old injury. He greeted Marcus with a grunt and a handshake that spoke of relief at having another set of hands to share the work. Mrs. Cassidy, whose first name was Elizabeth but who insisted he call her Mrs. Cassidy, laid out the situation. The ranch had 200 head of cattle that needed tending. Fences needed mending after the spring runoff had washed out several sections. Hay needed to be cut and stored for winter. Several horses needed breaking. The list went on, and Marcus understood why the previous foreman had quit. But Marcus had never been afraid of hard work. He rolled up his sleeves and got to it, spending that first day riding the fence line with Pete, assessing what needed to be fixed. Pete was a man of few words, but he knew his business, and Marcus found himself learning the lay of the land and the routines of the ranch. As the sun set that first evening, Marcus sat down to dinner in the main house with Mrs. Cassidy, Pete, and Mrs. Cassidy's daughter, a girl of about 16 named Anne. The girl was quiet and watchful, still grieving her father, Marcus guessed. The meal was simple but plentiful. roast chicken, potatoes, greens from the garden, and fresh bread. After weeks of hardtack and jerky, it tasted like a feast. That night, lying in his bunk with the sounds of Pete's snoring drifting across the room, Marcus thought about Clara again. He had steady work now. In a month, he would have wages. He could hire her to do his washing and mending, as he had promised. It was not much, but it was something. And maybe, if he could prove himself here, if he could save a little money, maybe there would be more he could do to help her. The days fell into a rhythm. Marcus worked from sunrise to sunset, mending fences, moving cattle, breaking horses. Pete taught him the particulars of this land, where the best grazing was, which water sources stayed reliable through the summer, how to read the weather and the shape of the clouds over the mountains. Mrs. Cassidy proved to be a fair boss, expecting hard work but not impossible labor, and she never asked Marcus to do anything she would not do herself. On his first day off, 2 weeks after starting work, Marcus rode back into Jordan Valley. He had his mind set on two things: buying some personal supplies and finding Clara. He located her eventually, coming out of the general store, where she had just delivered some mending to the shopkeeper's wife. "Miss Thornton," he called out, and she turned, her face lighting up in a way that made his heart do a strange flip in his chest. "Mr. Brennan," she said, then corrected herself with a slight smile. "Marcus, I heard you got the job at the Cassidy Ranch." "I did," he confirmed, "which means I have a proposition for you, if you are still willing." They walked to the edge of town where they could talk without every busybody listening in. Marcus explained that he needed someone to handle his washing and mending, and that he would be willing to pay her $2 a week for the service. It was more than he probably should offer given his wages, but he saw the way her eyes widened and knew it would make a difference for her. "That is very generous," Clara said carefully. "But $2 seems like too much for simple washing and mending." "Take it or leave it," Marcus said with a shrug. "That is what the work is worth to me. You will be saving me time I would spend doing it myself. Time I can use to rest or take on extra work. Besides, you said you would not do half a job. I am paying for quality work." She smiled then, a real smile that transformed her face. "All right, you have a deal." They arranged for him to bring his things the following week. As they talked, Marcus found himself telling her about the ranch, about the work he was doing, about Pete and Mrs. Cassidy and Anne. Clara listened with genuine interest, asking questions that showed she understood ranch life, and Marcus remembered she had traveled west with her father, had probably seen and learned a lot in their time searching for opportunity. "How are you managing?" he asked. "Have you found more work?" "A little," Clara said. "Mrs. Patterson hired me to help clean out her attic, which gave me a few dollars, and I have been doing mending for a few of the other families in town. It is not much, but I am getting by." Marcus wanted to ask more, wanted to know if she was eating enough, if she had a safe place to sleep, if anyone was bothering her. But he knew Clara's pride would not appreciate him prying too much. Instead, he said, "If you ever need anything, or if there is ever any trouble, you can get word to me at the ranch. Mrs. Cassidy comes into town most Saturdays for supplies. She could carry a message." Clara looked at him with those green eyes, and he saw understanding there, and something else he could not quite name. "Thank you, Marcus. That means more than you know." They parted ways, and Marcus rode back to the ranch feeling lighter than he had in years. He had work, he had a purpose, and he had a connection to someone who mattered. It was more than he had expected to find in Jordan Valley. The summer passed in a blur of hard work and quiet moments. Marcus proved his worth at the ranch, handling problems before Mrs. Cassidy even knew they existed, working extra hours when needed, treating the animals with a gentle firmness that got results. Mrs. Cassidy raised his pay to $30 a month after the first month, saying he was worth more than her previous foreman had been. Every week, Marcus brought his washing and mending to Clara, and every week she returned it clean and expertly repaired. But their transactions became less about the work and more about the conversations. They would meet at the edge of town and walk together, talking about everything and nothing. Marcus learned that Clara had been educated by her father, that she could read and write and do mathematics, that she had a quick mind and a curious nature. She learned that Marcus had taught himself to read from newspapers and dime novels, that he had a gift with animals, that he dreamed of someday having a small place of his own. The attraction between them grew slowly, carefully, like a plant growing in harsh soil. Marcus was drawn to Clara's strength, her kindness, her refusal to be defeated by circumstances that would have broken a lesser person. Clara saw in Marcus a goodness that he did not see in himself, a steadiness and honor that was rare in the rough world of the frontier. It was late August when things changed between them. Marcus had come into town on a Saturday afternoon and found Clara behind the general store, once again sharing food with stray animals. This time, it was a piece of jerky she had been given as partial payment for some mending, and she was carefully dividing it among 4 dogs and 2 cats. "You are going to end up feeding every stray in the territory," Marcus said, announcing his presence so he would not startle her. Clara looked up and smiled. "Maybe, but they do not have anyone else." Marcus crouched down beside her, and one of the dogs, the spotted one he remembered from that first day, came over to sniff his hand. He scratched behind the dog's ears, earning a tail wag. "You have a good heart, Clara Thornton," he said quietly. "You are not so bad yourself, Marcus Brennan," she replied. They were sitting close together in the shade of the building, the heat of the day pressing down around them. Marcus could smell the clean scent of the soap Clara used, could see the way the sunlight filtering through the gaps in the boards above painted stripes of gold across her hair. His hand was still on the dog's head, but his attention was entirely on the woman beside him. "Clara," he said, his voice rougher than he intended, "I need to ask you something, and you can tell me no if you want, but I need to ask." She turned to face him fully, her green eyes steady. "What is it?" "I know I do not have much to offer. I am just a ranch hand with $30 a month and a bunk in someone else's property. But I want to court you properly, if you will let me. I want to take you to church socials and buy you dinner and see if maybe this thing between us could become something more. I am not good with words, but you matter to me, and I think maybe I matter to you too." Clara's breath caught, and for a moment Marcus thought he had ruined everything by speaking too soon. But then she reached out and took his hand, her fingers slender and strong against his calloused palm. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I would like that very much." Relief and joy flooded through Marcus in equal measure. He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles, a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and exactly right. Clara's cheeks flushed pink, but she did not pull away. From that day forward, Marcus courted Clara with a determination and sincerity that surprised them both. He brought her wildflowers picked from the meadows near the ranch. He took her to church on Sundays, enduring the whispers and stares of the townsfolk who could not quite believe that someone would court a woman in Clara's circumstances. He saved his money and bought her a new dress, a practical calico that fit her properly and made her eyes shine with happiness. Mrs. Cassidy, when she learned about Marcus's courtship, surprised him by inviting Clara to Sunday dinner at the ranch. "Any woman who can gentle a rough man like you deserves my respect," she said with a rare smile. That first Sunday dinner was awkward at first, with Anne watching Clara with curious eyes and Pete grunting his approval between bites of roast beef. But Clara won them over with her genuine interest in their lives, her willingness to help with the dishes, and the way she laughed at Pete's terrible jokes. By the end of the evening, even Anne was smiling, and Mrs. Cassidy pulled Marcus aside to tell him he had chosen well. As summer faded into autumn, Marcus and Clara's relationship deepened. They talked about their pasts, their dreams, their fears. Clara confessed that she sometimes wondered if she should give up on Jordan Valley and try to find work in a bigger city, even if it meant traveling there on foot. Marcus told her about the nightmares he sometimes had, about being alone and adrift with no one who cared whether he lived or died. "You are not alone anymore," Clara told him, her hand warm in his. "You have me now." "And you have me," Marcus replied, "for as long as you want me." It was in October, when the aspen trees in the mountains turned gold and the air grew crisp with the promise of winter, that Marcus made his decision. He had been working at the Cassidy Ranch for 4 months and had saved nearly every penny of his wages. He had almost $100 now, more money than he had ever had at one time in his life. It was not a fortune, but it was enough. He rode into Jordan Valley on a Saturday afternoon and went straight to the jeweler, who sometimes passed through town. The man had a small collection of rings, nothing fancy, but Marcus found one that seemed right. A simple gold band with a small garnet set in the center. It cost him $15, a significant portion of his savings. But when he held it up to the light and imagined it on Clara's finger, he knew it was worth every cent. That evening, Marcus asked Clara to take a walk with him, They headed out of town toward a small rise that overlooked the valley, the sun setting in a blaze of orange and purple behind the mountains. Clara's hand was tucked into the crook of his arm, and Marcus could feel his heart pounding so hard he was sure she must hear it. When they reached the top of the rise, Marcus turned to face her. He had rehearsed this moment a dozen times in his head, but now that it was here, all his planned words fled. "Clara," he began, then stopped, took a breath, and started again. "When I rode into Jordan Valley 4 months ago, I was about as lost as a man could be. I had no job, no prospects, and no reason to think anything would ever change. And then I saw you, sitting in that alley, sharing your last food with animals that most people would not even look at twice. In that moment, I knew. I knew you were different. I knew you were special. I knew you were worth keeping." Clara's eyes were shining with unshed tears, but she did not interrupt. "I am not a rich man, and I probably never will be," Marcus continued. "But I am a good worker, and I am honest, and I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret taking a chance on me. Clara Thornton, will you marry me?" He pulled the ring from his pocket and held it out to her. Clara looked at the ring, then at his face, and the tears spilled over, tracking down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Marcus, I will marry you." Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger, and it fit as if it had been made for her. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and the world fell away until there was nothing but the two of them on that hilltop. Two people who had been alone and adrift and had somehow found each other. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Jordan Valley. Mrs. Cassidy stood up with Clara, and Pete stood up with Marcus. Anne scattered wildflowers down the aisle, her face split in a rare grin. The preacher, a circuit rider who passed through once a month, performed the ceremony with simple dignity. When Marcus placed the second ring on Clara's finger, a wider gold band he had bought to match the engagement ring, his hand shook slightly, but his voice was steady as he repeated his vows. Mrs. Cassidy had offered them the use of a small cabin on her property, a line shack that had once housed a herder during the summer months. It was just one room with a fireplace and a loft for sleeping, but Marcus and Clara spent a week fixing it up, making it a home. They scrubbed the floors, repaired the roof, installed real windows in place of the shutters. Mrs. Cassidy gave them a wedding present of a bed frame and mattress, and Pete built them a table and 2 chairs from scrap lumber. Their wedding night was tender and nervous and sweet. Marcus had been with women before, but never like this, never with someone who mattered this much. Clara was a virgin, and he took his time, gentling her fears, showing her pleasure slowly and carefully. When they finally came together, it felt like the final piece of a puzzle sliding into place, 2 separate souls becoming one. The winter that followed was hard, as winters in that high desert country always were. Snow piled up in drifts taller than a man, and temperatures dropped so low that water froze solid in the buckets overnight. But Marcus and Clara were warm in their little cabin, wrapped in quilts and each other, building a life together one day at a time. Clara took over the cooking for the ranch hands, which brought in an extra $5 a month and gave her a purpose beyond just being Marcus's wife. She proved to be an excellent cook, and even Pete, who complained about everything, had nothing but praise for her meals. She also started taking in mending from the other ranch families in the area, building up a steady stream of income that she carefully saved. Marcus continued to work hard, but now he had a reason beyond just survival. He was working toward a future, toward the dream of eventually having a small place of their own. Mrs. Cassidy, seeing how dedicated he was, began talking about the possibility of him taking over as foreman when Pete eventually retired. It was not a definite offer, but it was more security than Marcus had ever had. In February, Clara told Marcus she was pregnant. They were sitting by the fire in their cabin, Clara mending one of his shirts, when she set down her sewing and took his hand, placing it on her still flat belly. "There is a baby," she said simply. "Our baby." Marcus felt his throat close up with emotion. A baby, a family, things he had never dared dream of having. He pulled Clara into his arms and held her close, feeling her heart beat against his chest. "I am going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "And I am going to be a mother," Clara replied, and he could hear the smile in her voice. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Clara continued to cook and work, though Marcus fussed over her constantly, worried that she was doing too much. Mrs. Cassidy, who had been through pregnancy herself, told him to let Clara be, that women had been having babies since the dawn of time, and Clara was strong. In the spring, as the snow melted and the world turned green again, Clara's belly swelled with the growing child. Marcus would lie with his head on her lap in the evenings, talking to the baby, telling stories about what the world was like outside the womb, promising to be the best father he could be. "What do you think it will be?" Clara asked one evening. "Boy or girl?" "I do not care," Marcus said honestly. "As long as the baby is healthy and you are safe, I do not care if we have a son or a daughter." But privately, Marcus hoped for a daughter, a little girl with Clara's green eyes and gentle heart. The baby came in early September, on a morning when the air smelled of approaching autumn and the aspens were just starting to turn. Marcus had ridden out to check the fence line in the north pasture when Pete came galloping up, his old horse lathered with sweat. "It is time," Pete gasped. "Mrs. Cassidy says come quick." Marcus did not remember the ride back to the cabin. One moment he was on the fence line, the next he was tying Copper to the post outside the cabin, his hands shaking. "Mrs.?" Cassidy met him at the door. "She is doing fine," Mrs. Cassidy said firmly. "The midwife is with her. These things take time. You need to stay calm and wait." Waiting was torture. Marcus paced outside the cabin, listening to the sounds coming from inside. Clara's cries of pain, the midwife's low voice, Mrs. Cassidy's firm commands. Pete sat on a log nearby, whittling a piece of wood into what might eventually be a toy horse. Hours passed. The sun crossed the sky and began its descent. Marcus's nerves were stretched to breaking when finally, he heard a new sound. The thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. Mrs. Cassidy emerged from the cabin, her sleeves rolled up and a tired smile on her face. "You have a son," she said. "A big, healthy boy." And Clara did beautifully. Marcus rushed inside. Clara lay in their bed, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. Marcus approached slowly, reverently, and looked down at his son for the first time. The baby had a cap of dark hair and a red squashed face that was already smoothing out. His eyes were closed, but his tiny mouth worked as if he was already looking for his next meal. One miniature fist had escaped the blanket and waved in the air. "He is perfect," Marcus breathed. "Do you want to hold him?" Clara asked. Marcus sat on the edge of the bed and let Clara place the baby in his arms. The weight of his son was both substantial and impossibly light. This tiny person was his responsibility now, his to protect and provide for, his to love. The enormity of it threatened to overwhelm him. "What should we name him?" Clara asked. They had discussed names, but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Marcus knew exactly what the boy should be called. "Matthew," he said. "Matthew Brennan. It means gift of God, and that is what he is. A gift I never thought I would receive." Clara smiled. "Matthew Brennan. I like it. Welcome to the world, Matthew." The baby opened his eyes then, unfocused but aware, and looked up at his parents. In that moment, Marcus felt something fundamental shift inside him. He had thought he understood love when he married Clara, but this was different. This was deeper, fiercer, a love that would make him walk through fire if needed. His son, his family. Life with a baby was chaotic and exhausting and wonderful. Matthew was a good baby, healthy and growing strong, but he still required constant attention. Clara handled the midnight feedings and the endless diaper changes with patience and grace, though Marcus could see the exhaustion in her eyes. He helped as much as he could, walking the floor with Matthew when the baby was fussy, changing diapers, doing whatever Clara needed. Mrs. Cassidy was generous with her time and advice, and Anne, now 17 and blossoming into a capable young woman, adored the baby and would spend hours rocking him and singing to him. Even Pete, the crusty old ranch hand, would soften when Matthew was around, carving toys and telling stories in his gruff voice. Marcus's world had changed completely. Where once he had been alone and rootless, now he had Clara and Matthew, a family to come home to, a reason to keep going when the work got hard. He found himself thinking about the future differently now, planning not just for himself, but for them. He saved more carefully, worked harder, looked for opportunities to improve their situation. When Matthew was 6 months old, Mrs. Cassidy called Marcus into her office in the main house. She sat behind her late husband's desk, looking every inch the capable rancher she had become. "Marcus, I want to talk to you about the future of this ranch," she said without preamble. "Pete is getting too old for the hard work, though he would never admit it. I need a foreman I can trust, someone who will treat this place like it is his own. I would like that person to be you." Marcus felt his heart rate pick up. "I would be honored, Mrs. Cassidy. The job comes with a raise, $50 a month plus your housing and food. It also comes with responsibility. You would be in charge of hiring and managing any other hands we take on, overseeing all the ranch operations, and helping me make decisions about the herd and the land. $50 a month." It was more than Marcus had ever made. With that kind of money, he could save seriously, could start thinking about eventually buying a small piece of land of his own. "I accept," Marcus said. "Thank you for the opportunity. Mrs." Cassidy stood and extended her hand. "Thank you for being the kind of man I can depend on." As Marcus shook her hand, he thought about the day he had ridden into Jordan Valley, hungry and desperate and alone. He thought about seeing Clara in that alley, sharing her last bread with strays. He had known then, in some deep part of himself, that she was worth keeping, worth fighting for, worth building a life with. And now, a year and a half later, he had a wife he loved, a son who was the center of his world, and a position that offered security and respect. Life was not perfect. Money was still tight, winters were still brutal, and there were days when Marcus wondered if they would make it. But they had each other, and that made all the difference. Matthew grew into a curious, energetic toddler. He took his first steps at 11 months, launching himself from Clara's arms toward Marcus with a determination that made them both laugh and cheer. He said his first word at 13 months, "Da," while pointing at Marcus. Clara pretended to be offended, but Marcus saw the joy in her eyes. When Matthew was 2 years old, Clara told Marcus she was pregnant again. This time, Marcus was prepared for the emotions that swamped him, but he was no less affected. Another baby, their family growing. He held Clara close and whispered promises into her hair, promises to take care of her, to provide for their children, to be the husband and father they deserved. This pregnancy was harder than the first. Clara was sick in the mornings and tired all the time. She pushed through, still cooking and caring for Matthew, but Marcus could see the toll it took. He tried to take on more of the household chores, though his long hours at the ranch made it difficult. Mrs. Cassidy, seeing the situation, hired a girl from town to come help with the cooking 3 days a week, giving Clara more time to rest. The baby, another boy they named Michael, was born in the spring of Marcus's 3rd year on the ranch. The birth was faster than Matthew's had been, but more difficult. And for several terrifying hours, Marcus feared he might lose Clara. But the midwife knew her business, and both Clara and the baby came through safely. Michael was smaller than Matthew had been, with Clara's blonde hair and Marcus's brown eyes. He was a quiet baby, content to watch the world with solemn observation. Matthew, now a rambunctious 2-year-old, was fascinated by his little brother, constantly wanting to hold him and touch him and show him things. With 2 children now, the little cabin that had seemed cozy when it was just Marcus and Clara began to feel cramped. Marcus started thinking seriously about building an addition, maybe a second room, where the boys could eventually sleep. He mentioned it to Pete, and the old man offered to help, teaching Marcus the finer points of carpentry. They worked on the addition through the summer, hauling logs and cutting boards, fitting pieces together with care. Mrs. Cassidy donated materials from the ranch's stores, and some of the other hands helped when they had free time. By autumn, the cabin had a second room with 2 small beds for the boys and space for their toys and clothes. Life settled into a new routine. Marcus worked his long days as foreman, managing the ranch with growing confidence and skill. Clara cared for the boys and continued to bring in money with her, cooking and mending. They were not wealthy by any means, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. Matthew grew into a bright, energetic child who followed Marcus everywhere when he was not working, asking endless questions about horses and cattle in the world. Michael was quieter, but equally curious, content to sit and watch before carefully attempting things himself. The boys were different in temperament, but close, already forming the bond that would last their entire lives. When Matthew was 4 and Michael was 2, Clara became pregnant for a 3rd time. This pregnancy was easier than the second, though Clara was older now, in her late 20s, and she tired more quickly. Marcus worried, but Clara assured him she was fine, that her body knew what to do. Their daughter was born in the winter, during a snowstorm so fierce that the midwife almost could not make it to the cabin. Clara named her Catherine, after her own mother, who had died when Clara was young. Catherine had her mother's green eyes and a head full of dark blonde curls, and from the moment she was born, she had both Marcus and her brothers wrapped around her tiny finger. Marcus held his daughter in his arms and marveled at how his life had changed. 5 years ago, he had been alone, drifting from job to job with no future and no hope. Now he had a wife who loved him, 3 healthy children, a position of responsibility, and a community that respected him. It seemed impossible that this was his life, that these blessings were real, but they were real. Every morning when he woke to Clara's warmth beside him, every evening when his children ran to greet him, every Sunday when they sat together in church as a family, he was reminded of how far he had come. The years passed, bringing changes both large and small. Mrs. Cassidy's daughter Anne married a young rancher from the next valley over, and the wedding was a grand celebration that brought people from miles around. Pete finally admitted he was too old for ranch work and retired, moving into town to live with his sister. Mrs. Cassidy, now in her 40s and ready to step back from the daily operations of the ranch, began relying on Marcus more and more, effectively making him the manager of the entire operation. With the increased responsibility came increased pay. Marcus was now making $75 a month, a princely sum for a ranch hand. He and Clara began to seriously save, putting away money each month toward their dream of eventually buying their own land. The children grew. Matthew, at 8, was already showing an aptitude for working with horses. He could gentle a nervous colt with patience and calm that belied his young age. Michael, at 6, loved the cattle and would spend hours watching them, learning their habits and behaviors. Catherine, at 4, was the family's ray of sunshine, always laughing and singing and bringing joy to everyone around her. It was when Matthew was 10 that the opportunity Marcus had been waiting for finally came. A small ranch about 5 miles from the Cassidy place came up for sale. The owner, an elderly man named Johnson, was moving to California to live with his daughter. The property was modest, 80 acres with a decent house, a barn, and good water. The asking price was $800. Marcus had saved $900 over the years. It was everything he had, the accumulation of years of hard work and careful saving. He talked it over with Clara late into the night, weighing the risks and rewards. "It is a gamble," Marcus said. "If we buy it, we will have almost no money left for supplies or emergencies, and I will have to leave my position with Mrs. Cassidy, which is secure. But it would be ours," Clara said, "our own land, our own home. We could build something to leave to our children." "Are you sure?" Marcus asked. "It will be harder, at least at first. We will be starting from nothing." Clara took his face in her hands and looked into his eyes. "Marcus Brennan, when I met you, I was alone and starving, sleeping in a shed and wondering if I would survive the winter. You gave me a life, a family, a future. I am not afraid of hard work or lean times, not as long as we face them together." Marcus kissed her then, a kiss that held all the love and gratitude and determination he felt. "Then we will do it. We will buy the Johnson place and build our own ranch." The next day, Marcus gave Mrs. Cassidy his notice. She was sad to lose him, but understanding, and she promised that she would always be there if they needed help or advice. The ranch hands threw Marcus a farewell party, and even gruff old Pete came out from town to shake his hand and wish him well. The paperwork was completed in early summer. Marcus paid Mr. Johnson the $800, and just like that, he was a landowner. He stood on the porch of the house that was now his, looking out over the acres that belonged to him, and felt a sense of accomplishment so profound it brought tears to his eyes. Moving day was chaotic. They loaded their few possessions into a borrowed wagon, said goodbye to the cabin that had been their home for 10 years, and made the 5-mile journey to their new property. The children were excited, running through the house and claiming bedrooms, exploring the barn and the outbuildings. The house was bigger than the cabin had been, with 3 bedrooms, a real kitchen, and a parlor with a fireplace. It needed work. The roof leaked in places, some of the floorboards were loose, and the barn needed repairs, but it was solid, and it was theirs. Marcus and Clara threw themselves into the work of building their ranch. With the last of their savings, Marcus bought 10 head of cattle and a small herd of goats. Clara planted a large vegetable garden and started raising chickens. The children helped with chores, learning responsibility and the value of hard work. The first year was brutal. There was never enough money, never enough hours in the day. Marcus worked until his hands bled and his back screamed in protest. Clara cooked and cleaned and cared for the animals while also tending to the children in the garden. They lived on beans and bread and whatever vegetables the garden produced. There were nights when Marcus lay awake wondering if he had made a terrible mistake, if they should have stayed safe and secure on the Cassidy Ranch. But they persevered. Marcus proved to be a shrewd businessman, buying low and selling high, making deals with neighboring ranchers for breeding stock and shared grazing rights. Clara's goat cheese became popular in Jordan Valley, bringing in a steady stream of income. Slowly, painfully, the ranch began to turn a profit. By the end of the second year, things were easier. They had 25 head of cattle now, the goat herd had tripled, and they had paid off the debts they had incurred for supplies. Marcus hired a young hand to help with the heavy work, giving him more time to manage the business side of things. Clara had help from the children, who were now 13, 11, and 7, all capable of handling significant chores. Matthew was already showing the makings of a fine rancher. He had his father's way with animals and his mother's quick mind for figures. Michael was quieter, but equally skilled, with a gift for anticipating problems before they became crises. Catherine was the family's heart, keeping spirits up during hard times with her sunny disposition and endless energy. When Marcus was 35 and Clara was 33, they had their fourth and final child, a surprise baby boy they named Martin. His arrival was both a blessing and a challenge, as Clara was older now and the birth was difficult. The doctor from Boise who attended the delivery warned them that another pregnancy could be dangerous, and so they were careful after that. Martin was a happy baby who grew into a sweet-natured little boy. His older siblings doted on him, especially Catherine, who treated him like a living doll. Matthew and Michael taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, and Martin showed early signs of being a natural horseman. The years continued to pass, bringing growth and change. The ranch prospered. Marcus bought more land, expanding their holdings to 200 acres. The cattle herd grew to over 100 head. They built a larger barn and added on to the house, giving each child their own bedroom. Marcus's hair started to show gray at the temples, and Clara developed fine lines around her eyes from years of squinting against the sun. But Marcus thought she had never been more beautiful. Matthew at 18 was a man now, tall and strong with his father's build and his mother's coloring. He worked the ranch alongside Marcus, and it was clear he would take over someday. Michael, at 16, had surprised everyone by showing an interest in veterinary medicine. He had been reading every book he could find on animal health, and had started helping the traveling veterinarian who passed through the area. Marcus and Clara supported his dream, setting aside money for him to eventually go to school back east. Catherine, at 14, was growing into a lovely young woman with her mother's grace and her father's determination. She had declared she was going to be a teacher and was already helping educate the younger children in the area. Martin, at 6, was still young, but already showing signs of being the family charmer, able to talk his way out of chores with a smile and a well-timed joke. On a warm summer evening, as Marcus sat on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the land he owned, Clara came out to join him. She settled into the chair beside him, her hand reaching for his automatically, a gesture as natural as breathing after all these years. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About the first time I saw you," Marcus said. "Do you remember? You were sitting in that alley, sharing your last bread with strays." Clara smiled. "I remember. You looked at me like I was crazy." "No," Marcus corrected. "I looked at you like you were worth keeping, and I was right." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "We have built a good life, have we not?" "Better than I ever dreamed possible," Marcus agreed. "A home, a ranch, 4 beautiful children. I am the richest man in Oregon, and I do not have a fraction of what some of the big ranchers own." "You have what matters," Clara said. "Love, family, purpose. Those things are worth more than all the money in the world." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. The sounds of their ranch surrounded them, cattle lowing in the distance, the horses nickering in the barn, the chickens settling in for the night. Inside the house, they could hear the children laughing over something, the sound of family and life and joy. Marcus thought about that desperate cowboy who had ridden into Jordan Valley almost 20 years ago, hungry and alone and without hope. He thought about the young woman who had given her last food to animals that needed it more than she did. 2 people who should have been defeated by circumstances, who instead had found each other and built something lasting. "I love you, Clara Brennan," Marcus said, squeezing her hand. "And I love you, Marcus Brennan," Clara replied, "today and every day." The years that followed were good ones. The ranch continued to thrive, becoming one of the most respected operations in the region. Michael eventually went east to study veterinary medicine, returning 5 years later with a degree and a wife, a kind-hearted woman named Sarah from Pennsylvania. They settled in Jordan Valley, where Michael opened a practice that served ranchers for miles around. Matthew took over more and more of the ranch operations as Marcus aged, proving to be an even better rancher than his father. He married a neighboring rancher's daughter, a spirited woman named Emma, who could ride and rope as well as any man. They gave Marcus and Clara their first grandchildren, twin boys who were the image of their grandfather. Catherine became a teacher, just as she had dreamed, opening a small school in Jordan Valley that educated children from all over the valley. She married a banker from Boise, a good man who supported her work and her passion for education. Martin, the baby of the family, eventually joined Matthew in running the ranch, the two brothers working together as seamlessly as Marcus and Clara had all those years ago. Marcus and Clara grew old together, their hair turning white, their faces mapping the years of hard work and laughter and love. But they never lost the connection that had formed that first day in the alley, when a hungry cowboy had seen something worth keeping in a woman who fed strays. On a crisp autumn day, when Marcus was 61 and Clara was 59, they stood together on the porch of their home, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. The ranch spread out before them, the result of decades of work and sacrifice and determination. It was harvest time, and the barn was full of hay, the root cellar stocked with vegetables, the cattle fat and healthy. "We did it," Clara said softly, her hand in Marcus's as it had been for 40 years. "We built something that will last." "We did," Marcus agreed, looking at his family, at the land that bore his name, at the woman who had changed his life. "And it all started because you had a kind heart, and I had sense enough to recognize it." "No," Clara corrected with a smile. "It started because two lonely people found each other and decided to build a life together. Everything else just followed." Marcus pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her white hair. "Either way, I would not change a single moment. Even the hard times, even the struggles, they were all worth it because they led us here." Their oldest grandson came running up then, pulling on Marcus's sleeve and begging for a story about the old days. Marcus swept the boy up into his arms, feeling the solid weight of the next generation, and carried him inside where the rest of the family was gathering for Sunday dinner. As Clara followed them in, she paused to look back at the land one more time. She thought about that desperate woman she had been, sleeping in a shed and wondering if she would survive another winter. She thought about the simple act of sharing bread with strays, never imagining that gesture would change her entire life. Life had been hard at times, but it had been good. She had known love and purpose and the satisfaction of building something lasting. She had raised 4 children to be good, capable adults. She had helped build a ranch that would support generations to come, and she had done it all alongside a man who had seen her at her worst and decided she was worth keeping. Inside, the family was gathering around the big table they had built to accommodate everyone. Children and grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter and life. Clara took her seat beside Marcus, her hand finding his under the table, and looked around at the faces of those she loved most in the world. "Shall we say grace?" Marcus asked, and everyone bowed their heads. "Thank you for this food, this family, and this life we have built together," Marcus prayed. "Thank you for bringing us through hard times and good times, and for surrounding us with love. May we always remember to help those in need, as we were once helped. May we always look for the best in others, as we found it in each other. And may this family continue to thrive for generations to come. Amen." "Amen," the family echoed. As they began to pass food around the table, Clara caught Marcus's eye and smiled. He smiled back, a smile that held 40 years of memories, of struggles overcome and victories won, of children raised and a life well lived. It was the smile of a man who had found his home, not in a place, but in a person. And Clara knew, with the certainty that comes from a lifetime of love, that she had found her home too. In a cowboy who had looked at her sharing her last bread with strays and known then that she was worth keeping, worth fighting for, worth building a life with. The meal continued, filled with laughter and stories and the warmth of family. Outside, the sun set over the Brennan ranch, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. The cattle grazed peacefully, the horses dozed in their stalls, and the land stretched out in all directions, a testament to what two people could build when they combined kindness with determination, compassion with hard work, and love with commitment. Marcus and Clara Brennan had started with nothing but each other and a shared belief that life could be better. They had built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, a ranch that would support their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But more than that, they had built a love story for the ages, proof that even in the harsh world of the Wild West, kindness and compassion could triumph, and that the most valuable things in life were not measured in money or land, but in the connections we forge and the love we share. As the evening wore on and the family eventually dispersed to their various homes, Marcus and Clara walked hand in hand back to their bedroom. They moved slowly now, their bodies bearing the accumulated aches of the decades of hard work. But they moved together, as they always had. "Another good day," Clara said as she began preparing for bed. "The best kind of day," Marcus agreed, surrounded by family, with a full table and a grateful heart. They climbed into bed, the same bed they had shared for 40 years, and Marcus pulled Clara close against him. She fit perfectly in the curve of his body, as she always had. "Marcus," Clara said softly. "Yes, love? Do you ever regret it? Not staying with Mrs. Cassidy where it was safe? Taking the risk of buying this place?" Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. "Not for a single second," he finally said. "Yes, it was hard. Yes, there were times I was scared we would fail. But we did not fail, Clara. We succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. And even if we had failed, even if we had lost everything, I still would not regret it. Because we did it together. And that makes all the difference." Clara turned in his arms so she could look at his face in the moonlight streaming through the window. "I love you, Marcus Brennan. I loved you that first day when you bought me dinner. I loved you when you proposed on that hilltop. I loved you through every struggle and every triumph. And I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you, Clara Brennan," Marcus replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me. The day I saw you sharing your last bread with those strays was the day my real life began." They kissed then, a gentle kiss that held 4 decades of love and partnership and devotion. When they finally settled down to sleep, they remained intertwined, two souls who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The years continued to roll by, bringing changes and challenges, but also deep satisfaction. Marcus and Clara eventually stepped back from active management of the ranch, leaving it in the capable hands of Matthew and Martin. They spent their days in gentler pursuits, Clara tending her flower garden, Marcus carving toys for his ever-growing number of grandchildren, both of them enjoying the peace that came from a life well lived. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary with a huge party that brought people from all over the valley. Friends and family filled the ranch, sharing stories and laughter and good food. Marcus looked around at the gathering and marveled once again at how far they had come, at how much love and life had grown from that simple beginning in a dusty alley in Jordan Valley. When Marcus was 70, he fell ill with pneumonia during a harsh winter. For several terrifying weeks, Clara thought she might lose him, but he fought his way back to health with the same determination he had shown in everything else. When he finally recovered, he was weaker than before, but his spirit remained strong. "I am not done yet," he told Clara as he sat in a chair by the fire, wrapped in quilts. "I still have years left with you, and I intend to make the most of every one of them." And he did. For another decade, Marcus and Clara lived their quiet life, surrounded by love and family. They watched their grandchildren grow and their great-grandchildren be born. They saw the ranch prosper and expand. They saw their children become respected members of the community, leaders in their own rights. On a peaceful spring morning, when Marcus was 80 and Clara was 78, they sat together on their porch as they had done thousands of times before. The valley was green with new growth, and the air smelled of wildflowers and fresh earth. Their great-grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the breeze. "It has been a good life," Marcus said, holding Clara's hand. "The best life," Clara agreed. "I would not change a single thing. Not even the hard times, the struggles. Not even those," Clara said firmly. "They made us who we are. They taught us what we were capable of, and they made the good times all the sweeter." Marcus nodded, content. They sat in silence, watching the sun climb higher in the sky, watching their legacy play and grow before them. This was what they had built, not just a ranch, not just a family, but a tradition of love and hard work and kindness that would echo down through generations. Marcus Brennan lived to be 83 years old. He died peacefully in his sleep on a summer night, Clara's hand in his, surrounded by the sounds of the ranch he had built and the family he had created. His last words were simple. "I love you, Clara. Thank you for the life we shared." Clara lived for 3 more years after Marcus passed, staying active and engaged with her family until the very end. She died at 81, sitting in her garden surrounded by the flowers she loved, a book of poetry open in her lap. Her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to mourn her, but they celebrated too, because Clara and Marcus had given them the greatest gift possible, a legacy of love, an example of what was possible when 2 people committed to building a life together. The Brennan Ranch continued for generations after them, passed down from parent to child, each generation adding their own contributions while honoring the foundation that Marcus and Clara had laid. The story of how it all began, of a cowboy who saw a woman sharing her last bread with strays and knew she was worth keeping, became family legend, told and retold to each new generation as a reminder of where they came from and what they valued. In the end, Marcus and Clara Brennan's story was not about wealth or fame or grand adventures. It was a story about kindness recognized and reciprocated, about love that grew from shared values and mutual respect, about 2 people who refused to let circumstances defeat them and instead built something lasting and beautiful. It was a story that proved that even in the harsh world of the Wild West, compassion could triumph, love could endure, and 2 ordinary people could create an extraordinary life together. Their graves rest side by side in the small cemetery outside Jordan Valley, Oregon, marked by simple headstones that bear their names and dates and a single shared inscription: "Together in life, together in death, together in love, forever." And on warm summer evenings, if you visit that cemetery, you might see families gathered there, descendants of Marcus and Clara, telling their children the story of how it all began with an act of kindness, a moment of recognition, and a love that changed everything.